The crowd gathered around the small girl sitting on the cold marble steps, their voices rising in cruel mockery. 10-year-old Aria clutched her cardboard sign closer to her chest, tears streaming down her dirt-stained cheeks as the security guards approached with handcuffs. But then the glass doors of the luxury building burst open, and Sebastian Kane, the billionaire CEO himself, came running toward her with tears in his eyes, shouting a name that made everyone freeze. What happened next would shock the entire city and reveal a truth that had been hidden for 7 long years. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished marble entrance of Kane Tower, the most prestigious office building in downtown Manhattan. Aria Martinez sat hunched on the bottom step, her small frame nearly swallowed by an oversized jacket that had seen better days. The cardboard sign in her lap read, "Please help," in careful, childish handwriting, the letters slightly smudged from her trembling hands. At 10 years old, Aria had learned to make herself invisible, to blend into the urban landscape like just another piece of discarded debris. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves around her face, and her clothes, though clean, bore the telltale signs of someone who had been living rough for far too long. She kept her eyes downcast, watching the steady stream of polished shoes that clicked past her on their way into the gleaming tower. The first sneer came from a woman in designer heels, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Look at this little vagrant, right here on our doorstep. It's absolutely disgusting." The woman adjusted her Hermes handbag with obvious distaste, as if Aria's mere presence might somehow contaminate her expensive accessories. A man in a tailored suit paused beside the woman, shaking his head in theatrical disgust. "These people have no shame, using children to manipulate people's emotions. Someone should call the authorities." His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being heard, and several other passers-by began to slow their pace, drawn by the spectacle. Aria's fingers tightened around her sign, her knuckles white with tension. She had experienced this before, the way crowds could form around her like vultures circling prey. The whispers started low, but grew steadily louder as more people gathered. "Probably trained by some criminal organization," muttered an elderly woman, her pearl necklace catching the morning light. "They use these children as props, you know. It's all an act." A young professional with perfectly styled hair pulled out her phone, not to offer help, but to document the scene. "This is exactly what's wrong with this city," she announced to her social media followers, angling the camera to capture Aria's hunched figure. "These people think they can just set up camp anywhere they please." The crowd was growing larger now, a semicircle of judgment and disdain forming around the small girl. Aria felt their stares, like physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders until she could barely breathe. She wanted to run, to disappear into the maze of city streets, but her legs felt frozen beneath her. "Someone needs to do something about this," declared a businessman, his voice booming across the marble plaza. "This is a place of business, not a homeless shelter. What kind of impression does this give to our international clients?" A security guard emerged from the building, his hand resting on the radio clipped to his belt. Marcus Williams had worked at Kane Tower for 15 years, and he had seen his share of difficult situations. But something about the small girl on the steps gave him pause. She wasn't aggressive or demanding like some of the panhandlers he occasionally had to deal with. She was just sitting there, quiet and still, like a wounded bird. "You need to move along, kid," Marcus said, his tone gentler than the crowd expected. "This is private property." Aria looked up for the first time, her dark eyes meeting the security guard's gaze. There was something in those eyes that stopped Marcus cold, a depth of sadness that no 10-year-old should carry. For a moment, he hesitated, his usual protocol warring with an unexpected surge of compassion. The crowd sensed his hesitation and pressed forward. "Are you going to let her stay there all day?" demanded the woman with the designer handbag. "We pay good money to work in a building with proper security. Call the police," added another voice. "Get her out of here before she attracts more of them." Marcus reached for his radio, but something made him pause again. The girl's face, partially hidden by her tangled hair, seemed familiar somehow. He couldn't place it, but there was something about her features, the shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw, that tugged at a memory he couldn't quite grasp. Meanwhile, 60 floors above the growing commotion, Sebastian Kane stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, a steaming cup of coffee forgotten in his hands. At 42, Sebastian had built an empire from nothing, transforming a small construction company into one of the most powerful real estate dynasties in the country. His success had come at a cost, though, leaving him isolated in his tower of glass and steel, surrounded by luxury but haunted by a loss that money could never heal. The morning news played silently on the television mounted on his office wall, but Sebastian's attention was drawn to the scene unfolding below. Even from his great height, he could see the crowd gathering around the building's entrance, their body language aggressive and dismissive. At the center of it all, barely visible among the sea of expensive suits and designer dresses, was a small figure that made his breath catch in his throat. Sebastian moved closer to the window, pressing his palm against the cold glass. The distance was too great to make out details, but something about the child's posture, the way she held herself despite being surrounded by hostility, sent a jolt of recognition through his chest. His heart began to race, and the coffee cup slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor. "Sir?" His assistant's voice came through the intercom, concerned by the sound of breaking ceramic. "Is everything all right?" Sebastian didn't answer. He was already moving toward the door, his usual composed demeanor cracking like ice in spring. 7 years. 7 years of searching, of following false leads and dead ends, of hiring the best private investigators money could buy. 7 years of waking up every morning with the same desperate hope and going to bed every night with the same crushing disappointment. Down in the plaza, the crowd's hostility was reaching a fever pitch. Someone had indeed called the police, and the distant wail of sirens could be heard over the morning traffic. Aria felt panic rising in her chest like floodwater. She had been arrested before, shuffled through a system that saw her as nothing more than a problem to be processed and forgotten. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crowd's jeers. "I wasn't bothering anyone," but her words were lost in the wave of indignation and self-righteousness that had consumed the gathered onlookers. They had transformed from individual people going about their morning routines into something uglier, a mob united by their shared disgust for someone they saw as beneath them. The elevator in Kane Tower had never moved fast enough for Sebastian's liking, but today it felt like it was crawling through molasses. Each floor that ticked by on the digital display felt like an eternity. His hands shook as he loosened his tie, his breathing shallow and rapid. What if he was wrong? What if it was just another false alarm? Another case of wishful thinking overwhelming common sense? But even as doubt crept into his mind, his heart knew the truth. A father knows his child, even after years of separation, even when that child is being kept from him by circumstances beyond his control. The police car pulled up to the curb, just as Sebastian burst through the lobby doors. The crowd parted slightly, expecting the building's security to handle the situation with quiet efficiency. Instead, they watched in stunned silence as one of the most powerful men in the city ran across the marble plaza like his life depended on it. "Aria!" Sebastian called out, his voice breaking on the name he had whispered in his prayers every night for 7 years. "Aria, baby! It's me!" The little girl's head snapped up, her dark eyes wide with disbelief. The face looking down at her was older, more lined with worry and grief than she remembered, but it was unmistakably him, her father. The man who had read her bedtime stories and taught her to ride a bike and promised her that no matter what happened, he would always find her. "Daddy?" The word came out as barely a whisper, but in the sudden hush that had fallen over the crowd, it carried like a thunderclap. Sebastian dropped to his knees on the cold marble, not caring about his expensive suit or the watching crowd. His arms opened, and Aria flew into them with a sob that seemed to echo off the glass walls of the surrounding buildings. Father and daughter held each other as if the world might try to tear them apart again, their tears mixing with the autumn rain that had begun to fall. The crowd that had been so quick to judge, so eager to condemn, stood frozen in shock. The police officers who had arrived expecting to deal with a vagrant instead found themselves witnesses to a reunion that spoke to something deeper than their usual calls. Marcus Williams, the security guard who had hesitated to enforce the building's policies, felt tears of his own welling up as he watched the scene unfold. "I never stopped looking for you," Sebastian whispered into his daughter's hair, his voice thick with emotion. "Not for a single day. I promised I would find you, and I meant it." Aria clung to her father with the desperate strength of someone who had been lost at sea and finally found solid ground. The years of uncertainty, of moving from place to place, of never knowing if she would have a home or enough to eat, seemed to melt away in the warmth of his embrace. But as touching as this reunion was, it raised more questions than it answered. How had the daughter of a billionaire ended up homeless on the streets of Manhattan? What had happened in the 7 years since they had been separated? And why had no one recognized her until now? The story began, as most tragedies do, with love gone wrong and the innocent casualties of adult failures. Sebastian Kane had not always been the isolated tycoon who ruled his empire from a tower of glass and steel. Once, he had been a young husband and father, building his business while trying to balance the demands of success with the needs of his family. Aria's mother, Isabella Martinez, had been the love of Sebastian's life when they met at a charity gala 15 years earlier. She was a social worker from a working-class family, passionate about helping others, and unimpressed by Sebastian's growing wealth. Their love story had been the stuff of fairy tales, at least at first. A successful businessman and a compassionate social worker, united by their shared desire to make the world a better place. But fairy tales rarely account for the pressures of real life, and theirs was no exception. As Sebastian's business grew, so did the demands on his time and attention. Isabella felt increasingly isolated, raising their daughter while her husband traveled the world closing deals and expanding his empire. The arguments started small, little disagreements about priorities and responsibilities, but they grew like cracks in a foundation until the entire structure of their marriage began to crumble. The divorce, when it came, was bitter and complicated. Isabella's family, who had never fully trusted Sebastian's motives or approved of their daughter's marriage to someone from such a different world, rallied around her with advice and support that gradually hardened into something calm, more calculating. They convinced Isabella that Sebastian would use his wealth and influence to take Aria away from her, that a man who spent more time in boardrooms than at home had no right to primary custody of a 3-year-old child. The legal battle that followed was vicious and public, played out in the tabloids and society pages as much as in the courtroom. Sebastian fought for joint custody, willing to restructure his entire life to maintain a relationship with his daughter. But Isabella's family had other plans. They painted him as an absent father, more interested in profit than parenting, a man whose lifestyle was unsuitable for raising a young child. The court initially awarded joint custody, a decision that satisfied no one but at least allowed Sebastian to maintain a relationship with Aria. For 2 years, they met at work, despite the ongoing tension between the adults. Sebastian treasured his time with his daughter, scaling back his business commitments to be present for school plays and soccer games. Aria thrived in both homes, too young to fully understand the adult conflicts that swirled around her. But Isabella's family wasn't finished. Led by her brother Carlos, a man whose own business ventures had failed while Sebastian's flourished, they began to plan something more drastic. They convinced Isabella that Sebastian was a danger to Aria, that his influence would corrupt her and turn her against her mother's family. The plan they hatched was simple in its cruelty and devastating in its effectiveness. One weekend, when Aria was supposed to be returned to Sebastian after her court-mandated time with her mother, Isabella simply didn't show up. Sebastian waited at the agreed-upon location for hours, calling Isabella's phone repeatedly as panic began to build in his chest. When he finally drove to her apartment, he found it empty, with no forwarding address and no trace of where they might have gone. The search began immediately. Sebastian hired private investigators, filed missing person reports, and used every legal avenue available to him. But Isabella's family had planned well. They had moved across the country, changed their names, and disappeared into the vast network of extended family and friends who were willing to help hide a mother and child from what they believed was a dangerous father. The investigators followed leads from California to Texas to Florida, always arriving just days or weeks too late. Sebastian's world contracted to a single, desperate focus: finding his daughter and bringing her home. His business suffered as he devoted more and more of his time and resources to the search. Friends and colleagues watched him transform from a confident, successful entrepreneur into a haunted man driven by grief and determination. Years passed with no solid leads. Sebastian never gave up hope, but he was forced to accept that the trail had gone cold. He threw himself back into his work, building his empire to even greater heights, while privately funding missing children organizations and maintaining a network of investigators who continued to search for any trace of Aria. Meanwhile, Aria's life with her mother and the Martinez family had taken a tragic turn. Isabella, consumed by guilt over what they had done and the constant stress of living in hiding, had begun to drink heavily. The family members, who had been so eager to help her disappear, began to distance themselves as Isabella's problems grew worse. Money became tight, and they moved frequently, always staying one step ahead of the investigators they knew Sebastian had hired. When Aria was 7, Isabella was killed in a car accident, her blood alcohol level well above the legal limit. The child who had once lived in luxury, surrounded by love and stability, suddenly found herself alone with relatives who saw her as more burden than blessing. Carlos Martinez, who had orchestrated the entire disappearance, was facing his own financial problems and had little patience for caring for his sister's child. Aria was shuttled between family members, none of whom were prepared or particularly willing to take on the responsibility of raising her. She attended a dozen different schools in 3 years, never staying in one place long enough to form lasting friendships or feel truly settled. The Martinez family lived in constant fear that Sebastian's investigators would eventually track them down, so they kept moving, keeping Aria's identity hidden and their own profiles low. When Aria was 9, Carlos Martinez was arrested for fraud, and the family's financial situation collapsed completely. With no one willing or able to care for her, Aria was placed in foster care under her assumed name. The system, overwhelmed and underfunded, shuffled her between homes and group facilities, never realizing that the quiet, withdrawn child in their care was the subject of one of the most extensive missing person searches in the country. Aria aged out of several foster placements, labeled as a problem child because of her tendency to run away and her difficulty trusting adult authority figures. She had learned not to get attached to people or places, because in her experience, both were temporary. The bright, confident child who had once been the center of her father's world had become withdrawn and guarded, protecting herself the only way she knew how. 6 months before that fateful morning at Kane Tower, Aria had run away from her latest foster placement, an overcrowded group home where she felt invisible and unprotected. She had been living on the streets of Manhattan, surviving through a combination of small acts of charity, food bank visits, and the occasional night in a youth shelter when space was available. She had been drawn to Kane Tower, not because she knew who owned it, but because the area around it was affluent enough that people sometimes gave her money or food. She had no idea that her father worked in the building that towered above her, no idea that he passed by the very spot where she sat every morning on his way to his office, 60 floors above. The cruel irony was that Sebastian had been so close to her for months without knowing it. His daily routine took him through the building's underground parking garage, directly to his private elevator, bypassing the main entrance where his daughter sat begging for help. If not for his decision to look out his office window that particular morning, they might have remained separated indefinitely. As Sebastian held Aria in his arms on the marble steps, the crowd that had been so quick to judge began to disperse, suddenly uncomfortable with their own behavior. The police officers, recognizing Sebastian Kane and understanding that this was a family matter rather than a criminal one, discreetly withdrew their handcuffs and took on the role of crowd control instead. Marcus Williams approached slowly, his radio crackling with questions from the building's security center. "Mr. Kane," he said softly, not wanting to interrupt the reunion but needing to understand the situation. "Sir, is everything all right?" Sebastian looked up, his eyes red with tears, but shining with a joy that Marcus had never seen in his employer's face before. "Marcus, this is my daughter. This is Aria. She's been missing for 7 years." The security guard's mouth fell open in shock. He had worked for Sebastian Kane for 15 years, had seen the man at his highest triumphs and lowest moments, but he had never known about the missing child who had haunted his employer's private hours. "We need to get her inside," Sebastian continued, his voice growing stronger as the reality of the situation began to sink in. "She needs food, medical attention, clean clothes, and we need to call Detective Morrison, the one who's been handling her case all these years." As they made their way into the building, Aria clinging to her father's hand as if afraid he might disappear again, Sebastian's mind was already racing ahead to all the things that needed to be done. Legal proceedings to restore her identity, medical checkups to ensure she was healthy, therapy to help her process the trauma of their separation. Most importantly, he needed to create a home for her again, a place where she could feel safe and loved, and never doubt that she belonged. The executive floor of Kane Tower, normally a place of quiet efficiency and corporate power, was transformed into something resembling organized chaos as Sebastian's staff mobilized to help with Aria's immediate needs. His personal assistant, Jennifer Walsh, had worked for Sebastian for 10 years and had heard him mention his missing daughter only in hushed, private moments. Seeing Aria in person, she was struck by how much the child resembled her father, not just in physical features, but in the quiet dignity with which she carried herself, despite her circumstances. "Sir," Jennifer said softly, approaching Sebastian's office, where he sat with Aria on his lap, both of them still seeming to hardly believe they were together again. "I've contacted Dr. Peterson at Mount Sinai. She's prepared to see Aria whenever you're ready, and I've reached out to Child Services to begin the process of restoring her legal identity." Sebastian nodded, his arms tightening protectively around his daughter. The legal and bureaucratic challenges ahead would be significant, but he had faced worse obstacles in his business career. The difference was that this time, the stakes were infinitely more personal. Aria had remained largely silent since their reunion, overwhelmed by the sudden change in her circumstances and struggling to process the fact that her father had indeed kept his promise to find her. The office around her was unlike anything she had experienced in years, all gleaming surfaces and expensive furniture, but what struck her most was the sense of safety she felt in her father's presence. "I have an apartment," she said suddenly, her voice small but determined. "Well, not really an apartment, but there's a place where I keep my things. I should go get them." Sebastian's heart broke a little at the thought of his daughter maintaining a secret hiding place, hoarding her few possessions like a wild animal preparing for winter. "We'll get whatever you need, sweetheart," he assured her. "But right now, let's focus on getting you healthy and safe. Everything else can wait." Dr. Rebecca Peterson had been Sebastian's family physician for years, and she had followed Aria's case from the beginning. When Jennifer's call came through, she immediately cleared her schedule, understanding the magnitude of what had occurred. The examination she conducted was thorough but gentle, designed to assess Aria's physical health while being mindful of the trauma she had endured. The results were both reassuring and heartbreaking. Despite years of uncertain living conditions, Aria was fundamentally healthy, a testament to her resilience and survival instincts. But she was also significantly underweight for her age, and Dr. Peterson noted signs of chronic stress that spoke to the fear and uncertainty that had defined her recent years. "She's going to need time," Dr. Peterson told Sebastian privately, while Aria was being fitted for new clothes by a personal shopper Jennifer had summoned to the medical office. "This kind of trauma doesn't heal overnight, even with the best of intentions. She's learned to be self-reliant and suspicious of adult promises, which served her well on the streets, but may make it difficult for her to trust that this reunion is permanent." End quote. Sebastian absorbed this information with the same focused attention he brought to complex business negotiations. His daughter's emotional healing would require the same strategic thinking and long-term commitment that had built his empire, but the metrics of success would be measured in smiles and laughter rather than profit margins. Over the following weeks, Sebastian transformed his penthouse apartment into a proper home for a 10-year-old girl. Aria's bedroom was decorated with care, but not overwhelming abundance, designed to feel safe and comfortable rather than intimidating. He consulted with child psychologists about the best approaches to rebuilding their relationship, learning about the effects of separation trauma and the importance of patience in the healing process. The media attention was intense, but carefully managed. Sebastian had always been a private person, despite his public success, and he was determined to protect Aria from the circus that inevitably surrounded high-profile reunions. A brief press conference announced her safe return but provided few details, emphasizing the family's need for privacy during their adjustment period. Aria's reintegration into a normal life was gradual and sometimes difficult. She had nightmares and moments of panic when she forgot where she was or feared that her father might disappear again. Sebastian hired the best child psychologists money could buy, but he also relied on his own instincts as a parent, sitting with her during the difficult nights and reassuring her with his presence that she was truly safe. School presented its own challenges. Aria had missed significant amounts of formal education during her years of instability, and catching up academically while adjusting to her new life proved overwhelming at times. Sebastian arranged for private tutoring and worked personally with her teachers to develop an individualized plan that acknowledged her unique circumstances while setting appropriate expectations for her progress. But perhaps the most significant challenge was helping Aria learn to trust again, not just in her father's love, but in the concept of permanence itself. She had learned to live day by day, never counting on tomorrow's security, and breaking that mindset required patience and consistency that Sebastian was determined to provide. The legal proceedings that followed were complex but successful. Aria's true identity was restored, and the Martinez family members who had participated in her disappearance faced serious legal consequences. Carlos Martinez, already facing fraud charges, was additionally charged with child endangerment and interference with custody. The case became a landmark in discussions about parental rights and the protection of children caught in custody disputes. But for Sebastian and Aria, the legal victories were less important than the daily progress they made in rebuilding their relationship. The first time Aria laughed at one of her father's jokes, Sebastian felt a joy more profound than any business success. The first time she asked him to read her a bedtime story, he had to excuse himself afterward to compose himself emotionally. Slowly, carefully, they began to build new memories together. Weekend trips to the zoo and museums, cooking lessons in Sebastian's modernist kitchen, quiet evenings reading together in the apartment's library. Sebastian reduced his business travel to almost nothing, delegating responsibilities to trusted lieutenants while he focused on the most important project of his life, being a father to his found daughter. Aria's personality began to emerge from behind the walls she had built for protection. She was intelligent and curious, with her father's analytical mind and a compassion that spoke to her mother's influence. She asked thoughtful questions about Sebastian's business and showed an interest in the charitable foundations he supported, particularly those focused on missing children and family reunification. 6 months after their reunion, Aria made a request that surprised Sebastian with its maturity and selflessness. She wanted to visit some of the shelters and support centers she had relied on during her time on the streets, not as someone seeking help, but as someone offering it. "There are other kids like me," she explained to her father as they sat in his office, looking out over the city where they had found each other. "Kids who are scared and alone and don't know if anyone is looking for them. Maybe if they see that I found my way home, it will give them hope." Sebastian felt his heart swell with pride at his daughter's empathy and strength. Together, they began to develop a program through his charitable foundation, focused specifically on street children and family reunification. Aria became not just a beneficiary of her father's resources, but an active participant in helping others who faced similar challenges. The media attention eventually faded, as it always does, but the impact of their story continued to ripple outward. Sebastian received letters from other parents of missing children, seeking advice and support in their own searches. He found himself becoming an unofficial advocate for missing children's causes, using his wealth and influence to support organizations and legislation aimed at preventing other families from experiencing what he and Aria had endured. For Aria, the transition from homeless child to billionaire's daughter was not without its complications. She struggled sometimes with the vast difference between her current life and the circumstances of the friends she had made on the streets. Survivor's guilt was a real and ongoing challenge. Addressed through continued therapy and volunteer work, that helped her process her experiences constructively. As Aria's 11th birthday approached, Sebastian wanted to celebrate in a way that honored both her past and her future. Rather than an elaborate party that might feel overwhelming, they planned a small gathering that included some of the people who had helped along the way. Marcus Williams, the security guard whose compassion had helped facilitate their reunion, was there. Dr. Peterson, who had overseen Aria's medical care, attended with her own family. Jennifer Walsh brought her children, who had become Aria's first real friends in her new life. But the most meaningful guest was Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman who ran a small food bank, where Aria had sometimes received meals during her months on the streets. Mrs. Rodriguez had never known the real identity of the quiet, polite child who had occasionally appeared at her facility, but she had always been struck by Aria's dignity and resilience. "I always wondered what happened to you," Mrs. Rodriguez told Aria, as they sat together during the birthday celebration. "You had something special, even then, a strength that I knew would carry you through whatever you were facing." As the evening wound down and the guests departed, Sebastian and Aria found themselves alone on the apartment's terrace, looking out over the city lights that stretched to every horizon. It was a view that Sebastian had enjoyed for years, but tonight it looked different, warmer somehow, seen through the eyes of someone who truly appreciated the security and love that surrounded them. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't looked out the window that morning?" Sebastian asked, his arm around his daughter's shoulders. Aria considered the question seriously, as she did most things. "I think we would have found each other eventually," she said finally. "Maybe not that day or that week, but somehow. Some things are just meant to be." Sebastian smiled at his daughter's wisdom, marveling at the depth of understanding she had developed through her difficult experiences. She was right, he realized. Their love for each other had never disappeared, despite the years and miles that had separated them. It had been waiting, patient and enduring, for the moment when they could be reunited. The story of their separation and reunion would become part of Kane family lore, passed down through generations as a testament to the power of parental love and the importance of never giving up hope. But for Sebastian and Aria, it was simply the prologue to a new chapter in their lives together, one built on the foundation of hard-won wisdom and unshakable devotion. In the years that followed, Aria would grow into a remarkable young woman, shaped but not defined by her early experiences. She would excel academically and athletically, develop meaningful friendships, and maintain her commitment to helping others who faced challenges similar to those she had overcome. Sebastian would learn to balance his role as a father with his responsibilities as a business leader, finding that his success in one area enhanced rather than competed with his success in the other. But all of that was still to come. For now, it was enough that they were together, father and daughter reunited against all odds, proof that love can survive even the cruelest separations, and that hope, no matter how dim it may become, never truly dies. The crowd that had gathered around a homeless child on the steps of Kane Tower that morning had expected to witness the removal of an unwanted presence from their pristine environment. Instead, they had witnessed something far more profound, a reminder that every person has a story, that circumstances can be deceiving, and that sometimes the most extraordinary moments emerge from the most ordinary days. For Marcus Williams, the security guard who had hesitated to simply follow protocol, the memory of that morning would stay with him for the rest of his career. He had learned that compassion and duty need not be in conflict, that sometimes the most important part of protecting people is recognizing their humanity, even in difficult circumstances. For the onlookers who had been so quick to judge and condemn, the revelation of Aria's true identity served as a powerful lesson in the dangers of assumptions and the importance of empathy. Some would carry that lesson forward into their future interactions with others who seemed different or troubled. Others would quickly forget, returning to their patterns of judgment and dismissal. But the seed of awareness had been planted. As the months passed and Sebastian and Aria settled into their new life together, the story of their reunion became a source of inspiration for other families facing similar challenges. Missing children organizations reported increased donations and volunteer participation, as people were moved by the proof that even the most hopeless situations could have happy endings. Aria herself became a symbol of resilience and hope. though she always remained uncomfortable with too much attention or praise. She preferred to focus on the future rather than dwelling on the past, and she threw herself into her studies and volunteer work with the same determination that had helped her survive on the streets. The relationship between father and daughter continued to deepen and evolve as they navigated the challenges of rebuilding their bond. There were difficult moments, times when the gap created by their 7-year separation seemed insurmountable. But there were also moments of pure joy, when they rediscovered the connection that had never truly been broken despite everything that had tried to destroy it. Sebastian found that becoming a full-time father again changed him in ways he hadn't expected. The sharp edges of his personality, honed by years of high-stakes business dealings, softened as he relearned the art of patience and unconditional love. His employees noticed the change, commenting on his increased empathy and his new perspective on work-life balance. Aria, meanwhile, discovered talents and interests that had been dormant during her years of survival. She excelled in mathematics and science, showing the same analytical mind that had made her father successful in business. But she also developed a passion for creative writing, channeling her experiences into stories that she hoped might help other children facing difficult circumstances. The penthouse apartment that had once been Sebastian's lonely retreat became a warm and welcoming home, filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation that had been absent for so many years. Aria's presence transformed every room, from the formal dining room where they shared meals and discussed their days, to the library where they spent quiet evenings reading together. As Aria's 12th birthday approached, Sebastian reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The pain of their separation would always be part of their story, but it no longer defined them. Instead, it had become the foundation for a deeper appreciation of what they had found in each other. The morning of Aria's birthday dawned clear and bright, with spring sunshine streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their home. As they sat together over breakfast, discussing plans for a small celebration with friends, Sebastian was struck by how normal and natural their life together had become. "Dad," Aria said, using the word that still sent a thrill of joy through Sebastian's heart every time he heard it. "I want to do something special for my birthday this year." "Anything you want, sweetheart," Sebastian replied, meaning it completely. "I want to go back to Kane Tower," she said quietly. "To the steps where you found me. Not because I'm sad about it, but because I want to remember how it felt when I realized you had kept your promise." Sebastian felt tears prick his eyes at his daughter's request. It would have been natural for her to want to avoid any reminders of that difficult period in her life, but instead, she wanted to honor the moment when their separation had finally ended. That afternoon, they stood together on the marble steps of Kane Tower, father and daughter holding hands, as they looked up at the gleaming facade of the building that had brought them back together. The plaza was busy with its usual mixture of business people and tourists, but no one paid particular attention to the well-dressed man and young girl who seemed lost in their own private moment. "I used to sit right here," Aria said, pointing to the spot where she had waited with her cardboard sign just over a year ago. "And I would look up at all those windows and wonder what kind of people worked inside. I never imagined that one of them was you, looking for me." Sebastian squeezed his daughter's hand, remembering his own perspective from that day, the moment when he had looked down from his office window and felt his world shift on its axis. "I think part of me always knew you were close," he said. "I just had to learn how to see you." They stood in comfortable silence for a few more minutes, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey that had brought them to this moment. Around them, the city continued its relentless pace, millions of individual stories intersecting and diverging in the endless dance of urban life. But for Sebastian and Aria Kane, the most important story had already been written. It was a story of love that transcended separation, of hope that refused to die, and of the miraculous way that life can surprise us just when we need it most. As they walked hand in hand back into Kane Tower, both father and daughter carried with them the knowledge that they had weathered the worst that life could throw at them and emerged stronger for it. The elevator ride to Sebastian's office was different this time, filled with quiet contentment rather than desperate urgency. Aria had visited her father's workplace many times since their reunion, but today she saw it with fresh eyes. understanding it not just as the place where he worked, but as the tower from which he had spotted her, and begun their journey back to each other. "You know what I want to do when I grow up?" Aria asked as they reached the executive floor, her voice filled with the confidence that had slowly returned over the past year. "Tell me," Sebastian said, genuinely curious about his daughter's evolving dreams and ambitions. "I want to help other families like us," she said simply. "Kids who are lost, parents who are searching. I want to make sure that no one has to wait 7 years to find their way home." Sebastian felt his heart swell with pride at his daughter's words. She had taken the pain of their separation and transformed it into a mission of compassion, a desire to spare others the suffering they had endured. It was exactly the kind of strength and wisdom he had hoped she would develop, but seeing it manifest so clearly still took his breath away. That evening, as they celebrated Aria's birthday with their small circle of chosen family, Sebastian stood to make a toast. The gathered friends, a mixture of old colleagues and new connections, forged through their shared experience, raised their glasses as he began to speak. "A year ago, I thought I had lost everything that mattered most," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I had built an empire, achieved every measure of success that society recognizes, but none of it meant anything without my daughter by my side. Today, as we celebrate Aria's birthday, I want to thank everyone who helped bring us back together, and everyone who has helped us rebuild our family." He paused, looking down at Aria, who was beaming up at him with the uncomplicated joy that had gradually replaced the wariness in her eyes over the past months. "But most of all, I want to thank Aria herself, for never giving up hope, for surviving everything that was thrown at her, and for teaching me that love really can conquer all obstacles." The toast was met with warmth and applause, but the real celebration was in the quiet moments that followed, as father and daughter sat together on the apartment's terrace, watching the sun set over the city that had both separated and reunited them. "I have something for you," Sebastian said, reaching into his jacket pocket to retrieve a small, elegantly wrapped box. "It's not much, but I thought you should have it." Aria opened the box carefully, revealing a simple gold locket that gleamed in the fading sunlight. Inside was a photograph of the two of them from before their separation, taken at a park on one of their weekend visits together. She was 3 years old in the picture, sitting on Sebastian's shoulders with her arms wrapped around his head, both of them laughing at some long-forgotten joke. "I carried this with me every day for 7 years," Sebastian explained, his voice soft with memory. "It was the only picture I had of us together, and it reminded me of what I was fighting to get back. Now that we're together again, I thought you should have it." Aria fastened the locket around her neck, her fingers tracing the delicate chain as she processed the significance of the gift. To know that her father had carried her image close to his heart through all those years of searching gave her a sense of security that no amount of wealth or comfort could provide. "I love you, Dad," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of everything they had been through together. "I love you too, sweetheart," Sebastian replied, pulling her close as they watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "More than you'll ever know." As the months turned into years, the story of Sebastian and Aria Kane became part of the fabric of their city's history. The marble steps of Kane Tower, once the site of judgment and cruelty, were quietly marked with a small plaque commemorating the power of parental love and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to see the humanity in every person. Aria grew into a remarkable young woman, excelling in her studies while maintaining her commitment to helping others. She established a scholarship fund for children who had experienced homelessness or family separation, ensuring that their educational opportunities wouldn't be limited by their past circumstances. Her high school graduation speech, delivered to a packed auditorium, focused on the theme of resilience and the importance of never underestimating the strength of the human spirit. Sebastian, meanwhile, found new purpose in his business ventures, directing more of his company's resources toward affordable housing and family support services. The Kane Foundation became one of the most respected charitable organizations in the country, known for its innovative approaches to addressing homelessness and family reunification. But perhaps the most lasting impact of their story was on the countless individuals who heard it and were inspired to examine their own assumptions and prejudices. The business people who had been so quick to judge a homeless child learned to look more carefully at the people they encountered in their daily lives. The social workers and police officers who dealt with similar situations began to approach each case with greater empathy and understanding. Marcus Williams, the security guard whose moment of hesitation had helped facilitate their reunion, eventually left his position at Kane Tower to work for the Kane Foundation, using his experience and compassion to help other vulnerable individuals navigate the system. His story became part of the training materials for security personnel throughout the city, emphasizing the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect. Dr. Peterson continued to serve as the Kane family physician, watching with professional satisfaction and personal joy as Aria developed into a healthy, confident young adult. She often spoke to medical conferences about the long-term effects of childhood trauma and the importance of comprehensive, compassionate care in the healing process. Jennifer Walsh, Sebastian's longtime assistant, became like an aunt to Aria, providing a stable feminine presence in her life while helping Sebastian navigate the challenges of single parenthood. Her own children grew up alongside Aria, forming bonds that would last throughout their lives and providing Aria with the sibling relationships she had never experienced. As Aria prepared to graduate from high school and begin her college career, she and Sebastian took one final walk around the neighborhood where their reunion had taken place. The city had changed in the intervening years, with new buildings rising and old ones being renovated, but Kane Tower still stood as a monument to their extraordinary story. "Do you ever regret it?" Aria asked as they paused in front of the building where their lives had been forever altered. "All those years you spent searching, all the resources you devoted to finding me? You could have moved on, started a new family, built a different life." Sebastian stopped walking and turned to face his daughter, his expression serious but filled with love. "Aria, listening to you even ask that question tells me that you still don't fully understand the depth of a parent's love. Every day I spent searching for you was a day spent pursuing the most important goal of my life. Every resource I devoted to finding you was an investment in what mattered most. There was never a moment when I considered giving up, never a second when I thought the cost was too high." He took her hands in his, looking directly into her eyes as he continued. "You are not just my daughter. You are the best part of me. Everything I achieved while you were gone was hollow without you there to share it. Every success felt like failure because the person I most wanted to celebrate with was missing from my life." Tears gathered in Aria's eyes as she absorbed her father's words, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of his love and commitment. "I'm sorry I doubted it," she whispered. "I guess I still have trouble believing that anyone could love me that much." "That's not your fault," Sebastian assured her, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "The people who should have protected you failed you in terrible ways. But I need you to know, with absolute certainty, that my love for you is unconditional and eternal. There is nothing you could do, nowhere you could go, no mistake you could make that would change that." End quote. As they stood together in the shadow of Kane Tower, father and daughter united by bonds that had been tested by time and trauma but never broken, their story reached its natural conclusion. Not the dramatic, Hollywood ending of a movie, but the quiet, lasting resolution of real life, where love perseveres and families endure despite the obstacles thrown in their path. The homeless girl who had sat on those marble steps, ignored and scorned by passing strangers, had been revealed as the beloved daughter of one of the city's most powerful men. But more importantly, she had been revealed as a human being, deserving of compassion and respect, regardless of her circumstances or appearance. The millionaire CEO who had built an empire through determination and strategic thinking had discovered that his greatest achievement was not measured in dollars or market share, but in the smile of a child who had finally come home. Their story became a testament to the power of hope over despair, love over indifference, and the extraordinary ways that ordinary moments can change everything. In a world that often seems dominated by division and cruelty, Sebastian and Aria Kane proved that connection and compassion remain the most powerful forces of all. As they walked hand in hand back toward their home, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, both father and daughter carried with them the knowledge that they had survived the worst that life could offer and found their way back to each other. Their reunion on the steps of Kane Tower had been witnessed by dozens of strangers, but its true significance would ripple outward for generations, touching the lives of everyone who heard their story and reminding them that love, patience, and determination can overcome even the most impossible odds. The story of the homeless girl and the millionaire CEO had reached its end, but the story of Sebastian and Aria Kane, father and daughter, was just beginning. They had found each other against all odds, and now they faced the future together, armed with the unshakable knowledge that their bond could weather any storm and survive any separation. In the end, that was the most important lesson of all, that family is not just about blood relations or legal documents, but about the choice to love unconditionally and fight relentlessly for the people who matter most. Sebastian Kane had spent 7 years proving that truth, and Aria had spent those same years learning to believe in it. Now, as they began the next chapter of their lives together, they carried that lesson forward as both a gift and a responsibility, sharing their story with others who needed to hear it, and living as examples of what becomes possible when love refuses to give up hope.